Thanks, everybody, for joining. We're just going to, well, first, thanks to Finn for helping us with tech. And thanks, everybody, for joining on Zoom. I know Angela, Donald, and others are joining us on Zoom from the OLLI folks, Osher Lifelong Learning Institute in Palm Desert. So thanks to all of them for joining, and for Finn for making it possible. Thanks also to Pamela Crossan in the History Department. Thanks to Alan Yavor in Strategic Communications. And thanks to Robbie Madrigal and Dean Rebecca Lubis for letting us use the library today. It's definitely a good spot for it. A quick order of business. We'll have several copies of Professor Link's book for giveaway, for raffle giveaway. So hopefully everybody got a ticket. If you didn't, I may go around at the last minute, give out a few more tickets. I have 2 copies of the hardback to give away, but I also have 10 copies of the paperback coming in. Unfortunately, they don't come out until May 7th, I think, the paperback. So what I'm going to do is I've got stickers. I've got a sheet of big square stickers, and I'm going to ask Professor Link to sign those for everybody, 10 of those. And when the paperbacks come in, I'm going to stick them on yours for you if you win one, and I'll put them in the mail, or you can pick them up in my office. So we've got only 2 copies of the hardback right now, but 10 of the paperback coming in. So if you got your number in, there's a good chance you're going to win. All right, that's just the housekeeping business. Now for the fun stuff. It's an absolute delight, a pleasure for me to welcome Professor Perry Link here today. Professor Link has a BA in philosophy, MA in East Asian studies, and a PhD in Chinese history from Harvard University. He has taught Chinese language and literature at Princeton from 1973 to 77 and from 1989 to 2008. Between then, he was at UCLA from 1977 to 1988. And then, I guess the lure of California, when I'm back out here in 2008 recently to UC Riverside. So we're delighted that he's joining us in person because he's right around the corner here, where he is a chancellorial chair for teaching across disciplines here at UC Riverside. And I think we're trying to figure out this morning, or this afternoon on our way up here, whether this is the 3rd or the 4th visit that Professor Link has made here to us at Cal State over the last 10 years or so. He joined to talk about several of his other works, including a collection of Liu Xiaobo's writings that he translated and edited. And today we have a brand new biography of the Nobel Peace Laureate Liu Xiaobo, which will be the subject of today's talk. Just a little bit more of the bona fides, and then I'll get out of the way. Professor Link has published in the fields of modern Chinese languages, literature, popular culture, intellectual history, art, and politics. I won't list all of his publications because we'll be here all day. But I remember as a graduate student, we all had to read Mandarin Ducks and Butterflies, popular fiction in early 20th century Chinese cities from UC Press. An absolute canonical work now in Chinese literature, but also in Chinese history. And so again, that going across disciplines is one of the coolest things about Professor Link's work. Also Evening Chats in Beijing, An Anatomy of Chinese Rhythm, Metaphor, and Politics. And then the last time he visited, he was talking about Liu Xiaobo's No Enemies, No Hatred, selected essays. Also Fang Lizhi, The Most Wanted Man in China. Translation by Professor Link. He's a board member of the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong, the CFHK, since 2021, which is a U.S.-based nonprofit organization which presses for the preservation of freedom, democracy, and international law in Hong Kong. I do feel like I want to get out of the way now, Professor Link, but I have much more in terms of the really remarkable bio of Professor Perry Link. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Professor Perry Link.
Thank you, Professor Murray, my old friend Jeremy. He teaches Chinese, and that's why he gives such splendid, long introductions. You know that it's an item of Chinese culture that you exalt the other and you demean yourself in all kinds of polite ways. So you can tell how Chinese he is to so excessively exaggerate his guest's credentials. I will say, though, that all of you are lucky to have a professor who gives away free books. I haven't heard of that anywhere else. This is amazing. Truly it is. It doesn't happen other places. So long live Cal State San Bernardino. I'm going to talk today about this Chinese thinker and dissident named Liu Xiaobo, who died in prison custody in 2017 at age 61. He originally was a professor of Chinese. So he's a colleague of me in a sense, and Professor Alan Barr, who's here in the first row. I've always thought that being a professor of literature and being a political critic are not at loggerheads, especially in Chinese tradition. If you take ideas and values seriously, as most Chinese writers have, especially in the last 100 years or so, it's very natural to be involved in what is called politics. I prefer to call it values study. And Liu Xiaobo is an example of that. A few days ago, the Russian dissident Alexei Navalny died, as you probably know, in a Siberian prison. Died of whatever we don't know at age 47. And people, especially in my field, compare him to Liu Xiaobo, both of whom were political dissidents, both of whom died in police custody before they should have. But some of my Chinese friends who observe this distinction think that it just shows how much better things are in the Soviet Union or in today's Russia than in China. On the internet the other day, I saw the critique that the Russian floor is the same height as the Chinese ceiling, by which they meant that, well, just in the response to Navalny's death, for example, Russian people could come out on the streets and they could demonstrate about that. They could even get together in long lines to go visit his memorial. They could give flowers. They could even receive interviews from international media. None of that would be remotely possible in China. So you might ask, why is it that Navalny, even though in fundamental ways he's like Liu Xiaobo, can be so famous and well known and make such a splash internationally when he dies, whereas Liu Xiaobo hardly anybody notices? Some of us foreigners who study China notice, and some people in China notice, but there is no mass uproar. You couldn't possibly go give flowers and take interviews on the matter in China. So my topic today, after talking with Professor Murray, is going to be what would, excuse me, what would Liu Xiaobo say if he could see China today and the world today? And the first thing I want to say about this is how much worse the situation in China has gotten just since he died in 2017. That was about the time that major repression in Xinjiang in the Northwest began, where by estimate, maybe 1.5 million people are put into what in Europe would be called concentration camps, labor camps, prevented from practicing their Islam religion, women sterilized so that more of this kind of thing can't reproduce. Children are put in schools where they're obliged, forced would be a better word, to speak Mandarin Chinese. So there's a program not just to control people, but to change, to sinify them, if I can use that word. And not just in the border regions. We see, of course, in Tibet as well, in Mongolia as well, this kind of sinicization of minorities has been underway for a number of years. But in China itself, things have gotten much more techno-fascist, if I can use that word, than they were even when Liu Xiaobo died 7 years ago. Xi Jinping has risen to be what Chinese wags call the great leader of everything. At the top, the key committees for the economy, the military, for all of these things are controlled by him personally. At least from the outside, it looks that way. And it leads people to speculate that what he's doing is pulling or trying to pull Chinese politics back to the situation under Mao Zedong, who died in 1976, but of course had that kind of all-controlling chairman of everything position. This similarity to the Mao era struck me with considerable force maybe a year ago already, when I saw a sign that said, photograph in China of a sign that said, 读习主席的书，听习主席的话，按习主席的指示办事. Read Chairman Xi's works, listen to what he says, and obey what he tells you to do. But what struck me is that that line I just read you in Chinese is word for word the same that was used in 1967 by Mao Zedong's comrade in arms at the time, Lin Biao. Word for word said that same sentence, except Mao Zhuxi was there, Chairman Mao, not Xi Zhuxi. But I want to flag that I don't think this trip back to Maoland is complete or even possible. For one thing, internationally, Xi Jinping has been much more aggressive, using what we call the wolf warrior approach to the international scene, taking over and crushing Hong Kong as well as the Xinjiang area I just mentioned, threatening Taiwan, aligning with Putin. That breaks my heart every time I think of all my Chinese friends, and they're in a country where the leader has said, yes, we support what Putin is doing in Ukraine. Alienating Japan and the US and England and Australia in the last few years, needlessly so. Entering fisticuffs, little confrontations with India and the Philippines. And in Chinese society itself, I think there have been big changes since the Mao era that make it impossible for a man like Xi Jinping, even if he tries, to go back to the way things were then. The internet's arrival in China has just made a huge difference in the way the public can be informed and say things to other people in a way that they couldn't before. And of course, the internet's controlled and you're punished if you get out of line and stuff, but still, that you can do it at all is amazingly different from in the Mao eras, where when people were atomized, they all might have the same complaints, but they couldn't possibly know it because there's no media to connect people. The internet has made a big change in Chinese society. And I'll give an example of this to illustrate. This is an extreme example, but still it illustrates my point well, I think. In 1975, there was a dissident in China named Liu Xiaobo, who dared to say that it's wrong that the children of high officials get favored in getting into college and getting jobs over ordinary people. And he called it the bloodline theory, the 血统论, and wrote an article. Mao Zedong was not happy with that and killed him, executed him in a stadium in Beijing, now called the Workers' Station, at the Chaoyang district in Beijing. And when Liu Xiaobo and others were assassinated, school children were organized to come and sit in the stadium in order to watch the bullets go into the backs of the heads, to intimidate children, obviously. But that happened. Now, a couple of years ago, last year, in fact, 2023, in that same stadium, there was a soccer match between Argentina and China. And you may know that there's this brilliant soccer star in Argentina named Lionel Messi. And the children, the excited youngsters all knew about that and came to see him. And during one of the breaks, a young man ran out onto the field and gave him a hug. And everybody loved it, except the security people who went out and chased down that young man, but that young man was fit and the security guys couldn't catch up. So they made a big tour around the whole stadium with these security guys trying to catch this youngster who had dared to embrace Lionel Messi. And what I want to point out about that is, what did that big audience do? They said, great, Liu, this is wonderful. Now, you take that audience response and compare it with the 1975 audience response of those school children watching somebody get executed. That, it's an excessive anecdote, but I want to give it to you as one way to see that the populace, for all the repression that's still in China, the populace has changed radically since the Mao era. So now let me go on to what would Liu Xiaobo say if he could see China today. And the first thing I want to say about that is I have no right to say. I can only guess. With a friend of mine, we've done this biography of him and nailed down everything we possibly could from 1955 when he was born to 2017 when he died. But if there's anything particular about him, there's several things particular about him. But one of them was he was always thinking, and he was always self-critical. He didn't mind saying, oh, that was wrong. I'm in a completely changed direction. I mean, in a nutshell, one of his things was his attitude toward women. When he was a rock star of a speaker in the late 80s, these girls, flocked around him and he welcomed them, and he was blatantly disloyal to his wife and so on. Later, he came to realize that was wrong. And when his wife asked for a divorce, he supported her. And from then on, when he found his second wife and got married, he was extremely respectful to her. And in his political life, he followed a woman named Ding Zilin, whose son was killed at the Tiananmen massacre. And Ding Zilin could make him do anything. So he completely changed his attitude toward women. And I could give you several examples of that, which makes it my point that I stand here and I will honestly tell you some things that I think he would think, but it's just my guess. I don't know. And actually, what we're guessing about is not from 2017 till now, but from 2010 until now, because 2008 was when he was pulled from his home and put into detention centers and things like that, and then was sentenced in 2009 to 11 years in prison. And the last written stuff we have from him, almost the only written stuff, is from his defense at trial, which is very eloquent. But since then, nothing. His wife was able to go to the prison in the Northeast and bring him books. And she and he could talk a bit about the books, but their talk was very monitored. And she was pulled away if they touched anything that the guards thought was politically sensitive. But actually, there was a fun little footnote there too. These guards aren't very well educated. So they had a book about the history of the Soviet Union and talked about that. And the guards never even realized that what they were saying about the Soviet Union was very relevant to what had happened in China. But anyway, his life from 2010 to 2017 is a blank, but not really a blank. It's just that we don't know what he wrote. And I'll tell you an anecdote about that. When he was discovered to have 4th stage liver cancer in the prison, and that's a problem too, because if he'd gotten proper medical care, they would have known that he was on his way to fatal cancer, but they did nothing until it was too late, and then pretended that they're taking very good care of him, sent him to the best hospital nearby, followed by a big troop of plainclothes police and some not plainclothes police, people with revolvers and so on, watching him. When he went to the hospital, he brought a big box that he put under his bed that had his manuscripts in it. And everybody knew that. His wife knew that. His brother, his family was there in that hospital room from time to time. They all knew it. What's going to happen to that box? When he died, 5:23 in the afternoon on that day, his wife went straight to grab that box. And the police went straight to prevent her from grabbing that box and hauled it away. Now, what happened to it? We don't know. There are records, examples in earlier times of things like that getting burned, and these may have been burned up. I don't know, but I'm hopeful that that didn't happen. That box may be sitting in some corner of a dusty police station in Northeast China as we speak. And if we ever get there, we'll be able to know something of what he said in those 7 years, which must be the best 7 years. His writing all through his life got better. And when he's in prison with nothing to do but read books and write about it for 7 years, he's bound to have written some very good things, but we don't know. Now, what I want to review for you today is what I think he would say about 6 different problems in Chinese society. And I'm going to call them the dead end problem, the split consciousness problem, the problem of absent elites, the problem of regime fragility, the problem of foreigners who don't get it, and the problem of the question really of garden variety values and how they persist. So the dead end problem, he has this image that he uses in several of his essays of the Communist Party of China having pulled China down a dead end or into a whirlpool. And what he means by those examples are things like the Great Leap Forward. You know about the Great Leap Forward when Mao Zedong said, 多快好省, let's do everything faster and better and more economical, including planting rice by sticking the stalks close together, and then the crops failed because that didn't work. Any peasant could have told him it wouldn't work, but it happened and the big famine happened. And so instead of catching up with England and passing America, which was another slogan of those years in the late 50s, there was a huge famine, the biggest famine as far as we know in human history. Maybe 30 million people died, maybe more. So that's pulling China down a dead end. Then a few years later, we have the Great Cultural Revolution, where one of the ideals was to create a new socialist human being, 社会主义新人, and these human beings should examine themselves deep into their own souls, 灵魂深处干革命, and children should abandon even their parents and oppose even their teachers. Daddy is close, mommy is close, but not as close to me as Mr. Mao was one of the slogans. Now, if you look at what we broadly call Confucian culture, since time immemorial, that's way too general a term, but I'll use it briefly. A couple of the deepest values are filial piety, respect for parents, respect for ancestors, and parallel to that, respect for teachers. Very fundamental values. And what the Cultural Revolution does is those very core values are to be knocked to smithereens. So criticize your own father and mother and even torture your own teachers. And what happened from that? The long-range consequences of that attack on fundamental Chinese values, I would argue, last even to the present day. But for Liu Xiaobo, certainly, it put a knife in the heart of Chinese social values. So that's another case of the party leading the Chinese country down a blind alley. Now, Liu Xiaobo did not live to see the reversal of the one-child policy, but that too, I would argue, and I think he would argue, is another case of the party leading the society astray. Because what about 2.5 decades ago, Deng Xiaoping at the top decided that the Chinese economy is not going to work because we have too many people. We have to reduce the population so every woman can have only one child. There were exceptions for national minorities, or if the first child was a cripple or something. But in general, that policy worked, especially in the cities, and the rate of growth of the population went way down until about 5 or 6 years ago. It turned out that's another dead end, a whirlpool we're sucked into, because it distorted the shape of the population, where now there were too many older people that fewer and fewer younger people needed to support. And one of the consequences was that, especially in more developed parts of China, they had sonogram diagnoses where one could tell the sex of a fetus. And Chinese culture from time immemorial has preferred boys to girls because boys carry on the family line and are obliged to support the elderly parents. And for those reasons, a lot of female fetuses were aborted, or even female infants drowned so that the family could go for a boy. So in parts of China, the ratio of infant girls to infant boys were ahead by about 1.2 to 1.0. Now, that might not seem a lot, but that's quite a distortion, especially when you figure that by the time they're in their 20s and looking for spouses, there aren't enough women. And then women are imported from the Philippines or Vietnam, or men get into knife fights about it. So that too had unforeseen negative consequences. But the main one for the leaders was the economic consequences. We need more young people to be workers to support the large population that's older. So it was another big change up until about 5 years ago. It was announced that no, you are not limited to having one child. We want you to have 3 or 4. And people are given prizes, incentives for doing that. So that's another example of pulling down a dead alley. I think that Xi Jinping would suspect, that Liu Xiaobo would suspect Xi Jinping's so-called China dream of today of being another maybe dead-end road. In recent years, the last couple of years, we've seen a slowdown in the Chinese economy, a big problem of triangular debt, a real estate perhaps bubble that might pop, young people feeling dispirited. Lots of young women now, especially in the cities, don't want marriage and family, and complicates the problem of we want more children. And young people, so-called tangping, just lie flat. I don't want to get married because I can't afford to raise a child. It's too expensive. I can't afford a house. I can't get a bride if I can't afford a house into which to put her in. So I'm just going to tangping, lie down and watch what comes to come. I've been impressed in the last couple of years at the extent to which Chinese elites, especially intellectuals and business people, have been fleeing China and settling in places like Tokyo and San Francisco and talking about creating an overseas new China of their own. So all of these factors that are results of Xi Jinping's dream effort in the larger sense, I can't be too certain here, but whether or not that dream too will end up to have had major negative consequences is something we need to watch. My second point, split consciousness problem. He has an essay where he describes a banquet where friends are drinking and eating and carousing and having fun and telling jokes, and even telling jokes about Xi Jinping and what a doofus he is, and laughing. And the next day, after they sleep, they go out and take their place in the work unit and behave as if none of that the night before had happened. So that there's a split, you see, in during the day in their consciousness from one context to another. But the split also invades people's minds, where you think at one level, in the official level of what you are and what you're supposed to think and react. And at another level, you have another kind of consciousness that has more to do with your own daily life. I want to tell you one of my anecdotes about this that, again, it's an extreme case, but I like it because it's so clear. In 2000, I helped edit a book called The Tiananmen Papers that my friend Andrew Nathan at Columbia had found. A mid-level official from China had taken them out, and they told all of these documents at various levels about how the government was thinking about preparing for the massacre and then recovering from it. So that was a super sensitive book, right? And I was having lunch at Princeton University with two officials from Tsinghua University, one of China's most prestigious, and we were talking about scholarly exchange, exchanging students and doing collective research and things like this. And at the end of the elegant lunch in the faculty club of the Princeton University, these two officials asked me, can we go to your office and keep talking? Okay, sure, come to my office. And we kept talking, and we kept talking about our Princeton in Beijing language program and things like that, until one of them suddenly, and here comes the anecdote, one of them said, do you have a men's room? He had to go pee. Yep, go out the door to the left, second door on your right, that's the men's room, and he leaves. As soon as he leaves, the other one asks me, do you have the Tiananmen Papers? Which he never would have asked in front of the other guy. And I said, yes, I did. And on my shelf, I took down a book and I signed it for him and I gave it to him. And he said, do you have an envelope? Yeah, I have an envelope. I gave him one of those school envelopes, big brown things, and he sticks it in before his colleague from Tsinghua University came back. Now, had this man needed to go to the toilet and that one stayed with me, would the same thing have happened? Maybe, I don't know. But what I want to show that, at least in that man's mind, and I don't think this is unusual, there were two very distinct levels. He's just waiting for the chance to ask if he could get a copy of the Tiananmen Papers. A few days ago, I saw on the Chinese internet this question. This was, I don't know who this was. It was asking in a group chat kind of scene. If you or your family were traveling in Gaza, be it for business or pleasure, and you ran into trouble, and if you couldn't get right in touch with our Chinese consulate, would you turn to Israel or to Hamas for help? Your answer will reflect your fundamental position, said this note. Very quickly, a response popped up that said, the great majority of Chinese would look to Israel for help, but would continue to side with Hamas in the conflict. And shortly after that, another one said, right, just like so many Chinese send their children to the US for study, but reliably side with Russia, not the US. So you see the point there. What you say and feel and do at one level and what you might say and feel and do at another level are different. And this is what I'm calling a split consciousness problem that I'm quite sure Liu Xiaobo would notice if he were with us today. Number three, the problem of absent elites. He has an article written in the 1990s about how you have intellectual elites and business elites and various kinds of elites that in the 1980s looked as if they might oppose the regime. And of course, you had Western politicians like Bill Clinton and Tony Blair who were very eager to see this happen. When the Chinese economy gets over, the bourgeois middle class is going to challenge the rulers. This is such a pattern from European history. It'll happen in China again. And Liu Xiaobo is noticing that these rising elites aren't forming opposition groups. they are being bought off. And he goes through them one by one. The business community, the theme of his comparison is empty seat, 缺席. The business community is missing trust. The law community missing conscience. The officials missing justice, and the intellectuals missing independence. Would he still feel that today for a lot? Yes, I think so. But I think, just in my perceptions of how things have changed a bit in China, you could argue that there's some recovery of the missing seats. I just mentioned a moment ago about how I've noticed scholars and business people, including some very wealthy people, leaving China, going to places like Tokyo and Stanford, and asking, how can we transition to a more democratic government, and funding efforts to do this. This didn't happen 4 or 5 years ago. Might that be a case of this problem of absent elites being not so bad as it was when he was alive, and might he notice it? I don't know. Let me go to number 4, the problem of regime fragility. Now, normally when you look at the Xi Jinping regime, you see on the outside, not fragility, but toughness. Everything's in place, everything is strong, everything is threatening, everything is full of pomp and panoply. But Liu Xiaobo liked to ask the question, why, if you're so confident, do you spend so much money on stability maintenance, Weiwen in Chinese, which uses more money than even the Army and the Navy and the Air Force together. And he's got anecdotes about how he calculates how much is wasted on, not wasted, but used on keeping people, even at the grassroots, repressed. Wherever he went, he was followed by plainclothes police. He had 2 or 3 that were assigned to him personally, and he actually got to know them and was almost friendly with them. He tells a wonderful anecdote about going down to Hangzhou and going on the famous West Lake. He was going with Ding Zilin, this woman I told you about, whom he came to respect very much, and her husband, who was another professor, and he and his wife went down to spend a few days on a cabin on a lake. And they wanted to go out one day on a boat. And there were these boats for rent. You go to a dock and they rented a boat, and we're going to go out and traverse the lake. Well, the plainclothes police that follow him everywhere are following him. He got the last boat. The police couldn't get a boat. And yet they were charged with following him. And he sort of knew them, and they sort of had a not friendly, but casual relationship. So one of the policemen comes to his boat and says, would you mind if one of us got in your boat to cruise on the West Lake? And he said, well, okay, why not? Come. So they did. And off they went. 4 dissidents and 1 plainclothes policeman having fun. They came back at noon and they went to a restaurant. And they ate local stuff and were so delighted with the local fare that they ordered seconds and so on. And then when Liu Xiaobo went to pay, the restaurant guy said, you don't have to pay. They already paid. The plainclothes police had, in order to return the favor, as it were, we will pay for lunch for everybody. So then they get in their cars and they're going to drive back to Shanghai. And they do. And the plainclothes police car tails them the whole way. Of course, they knew that would happen. But then they get lost. Their GPS or something misled them, and they don't know how to get back to Shanghai. What are we going to do? Well, they parked the car at the side of the road. Of course, the tailing police car parked behind them. And Liu Xiaobo gets out and goes back and says, we're lost. Why don't you guys lead? So he tells these anecdotes partly tongue-in-cheek. But then what he does seriously is, when those plainclothes police paid for lunch, he made the comment, this shows that they are funded a lot better than the plainclothes police in Beijing, because they never would have done that. And then he does a little calculation saying, I'm a Liu Xiaobo, and there's several others like me, quite a few like me, and they watch all of us so much. And now let's count out how many people, how much money do they get per person, and how much is that per month, per year? And it comes up to billions of yuan on repression nationwide. So I give you this as an example of what he would say shows that there's a problem of regime fragility underneath that confident exterior. They wouldn't do all of that if they really were confident. And another example he gives is to look at the pomp and ceremony you see at these great national conventions, which we've just seen last week. Every year in March, the so-called two sessions of the Chinese National People's Congress and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, which are called in the Western press rubber stamp organizations. And that's not unfair. By now, especially, they are just that. But there you see beautiful rooms decked out with beautiful flags and red upholstery and gold trim, and everybody with an elegant teacup in front of them. And it is pomp and panoply to die for. And Liu Xiaobo says, if you really were confident, would you need all that pomp and panoply? I forgot what year it was. Xi Jinping came out with his 3 confidences. I and all of us Communist Party members should have 3 confidences. And I can't recite for you what the 3 were. I don't remember. But the point is, and Liu Xiaobo said this in one of his articles, somebody who's really confident doesn't have to stand up and say, I'm confident. And all of you followers of me should be confident. Confident people, by definition, don't have to do that. So that's what I mean by the problem of regime fragility. And I think it applies even today. I think the US government, for example, overestimates the strength of the Chinese regime just because these surface impressions are so strong, but they don't see the internal fragility and unease that's at stake. Just a couple days ago, the Article 23 was announced in Hong Kong, a real authoritarian crackdown on dissent that makes China look strong, but overlooks the fact that right up there with Xi Jinping, the other very wealthy people near the top don't necessarily agree with him about what he's doing in Hong Kong because they have investments there. They own property there. They do business through Hong Kong. So I see that too as the underlying reality and the surface reality are different. I want to go to the problem of foreigners who don't get it. He has a wonderful essay called exactly that, Why Foreigners Don't Understand Chinese Officials. And he says, obviously, one of the reasons is that the Westerners go to these svelte, modern metropolises. Shanghai looks so modern, and Beijing and Tianjin, and I'm sure Chongqing and Chengdu are all very elegant and beautiful. And then you meet with Chinese officials who are smooth talking. And Liu Xiaobo's article argues that the officials that are assigned to receive and talk with foreigners are selected for, do they know a foreign language well, especially English? And are they suave? And can they give the impression that we're 2 countries and we are co-equal and talk well at that level? I'm going to skip 1 or 2 things here. How much time am I using? Am I? Okay.
We're still good. We have 3:15 now.
Oh, okay. Okay. This famous Chinese intellectual from Tsinghua University's history department named Qin Hui, who is in the US now, And he made a point the other day about foreigners not getting it. Don't even ask the right questions, let alone understand the right answers. And his example was 15 years of, at the UN, Western powers bargaining with the Communist Party of China over the rate at which they subsidize farmers. Because when regimes subsidize economies, that leads to unfair competition and so on. And the Westerners were very proud that they'd finally bargained the Chinese government down from 15% subsidy to 8% subsidy for farmers. And Qin Wei, who studied farmers from the beginning, that's his specialty, said, the whole thing's absurd because the Chinese government does not subsidize farmers. It does the opposite. It takes funds from them in order to fund its urban activities. So he was saying that here you have all of this energy and focus on answering a question that shouldn't even be asked in that way because it's the opposite question that should be asked. Now I want to go back to Liu Xiaobo's analysis of the talking between foreigners and foreign handler officials. The surface area, the surface level is we're the Chinese side, you're the American side, and we have this and you have that, and we find our common grounds and we communicate as if they're speaking as equals between the two countries. And Liu Xiaobo says it's naive to view them that way because really underneath that two countries egalitarianism, they are charged with and do push the Communist Party's point of view. And it's not a matter of finding common grounds between equals, but pressing for the Chinese government's own interests. And that's not even enough because beneath that level, you have the personal incentive point of view. So we're talking at this level, but really pushing for the party's interests here and really sometimes pushing for the private interests of that person. And I'll give you an example of this. This comes from Professor Murray just mentioned the Fang Li book that I had translated. He's got a wonderful example of this. When Fang Li, this astrophysicist, was stuck in the American embassy for 13 months, he got to know the American ambassador fairly well, a man named James Lilly. And in July of 1989, James Lilly, the American ambassador, was called to the Ministry of Education to consult with the Minister of Education, who's a man named Tang Tang, homonyms for the surname and the given name. And he went there and official Tang Tang scolded the American ambassador because the US Congress had just passed a rule that said Chinese students who were in the United States at the time of the massacre could stay if they feared to go back to China. They would get automatic, unlimited extensions of their visas. And Tang Tang, the official, called Ambassador Lilly to say, that's not fair, that's wrong, that's against our two countries' cooperation and so on. Okay, James Lilly goes back to the US Embassy and less than an hour later, the phone rings and it's the secretary of this Tang Tang guy who's asking the ambassador if he can please expedite his wife's visa to the US. She was applying and he wanted to make sure this worked. And he added, and can you give her that special consideration of unlimited visa? The couple already had 4 children who were already in the US and were benefiting from that unlimited visa extension. So that's a dramatic example, but what I show about to illustrate Liu Xiaobo's point that beneath both the official level and the party interest level, you have personal interests levels that are perking there and used sometimes. And US diplomats are, on the whole, naive about this, as are scholars and others who go to China and do their interviews in English and don't see these levels, don't even know that they're there. Now, I raise this question because since 2017, when he died, there were two officials invited into the Trump administration. Don't get me or Liu Xiaobo wrong here. I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump, but these two officials were the first ones in the history of Chinese-American diplomatic exchanges since the 1970s, the first who could see lower levels, these more hidden levels of diplomatic interchange. I'm referring to Yu Chun, who has a PhD in Chinese history from Berkeley and somehow got invited to be the China advisor in the State Department, worked under Mike Pompeo. I asked Mo Chun what he thought of Pompeo, and he said one really good thing about Pompeo was he listens. He asked a question and I answered, and he listens. His impression was that certain other officials did that kind of thing pro forma and didn't listen as well. The other one I want to point out is Matt Pottinger, whose Chinese name is Bo Ming, who became the main China advisor in the White House during those years. Those two represent a change from the kind of diplomat official that Liu Xiaobo was complaining about in this article, because Yu Chun was from China. He knew from the ground up what these things were like and began to infuse those views into the U.S. State Department. This is interesting to me for another reason, and that's because this was 2018 or 19 when Yu Chun went into the U.S. State Department. From 1972, when informal relations between the Chinese and U.S. governments began, all the way until 2017, nobody in the State Department or the White House on China was Chinese. They were all white guys. Was there a black guy in there somewhere? I can't remember, but no Chinese. Yu Chun was the first one. And this raises the question of why that would be, because if you look at Eastern Europe, for example, Zbigniew Brzezinski was from Poland, right? And Madeleine Albright from Czechoslovakia. And they got in years ago and were taken seriously. And as insiders from those systems helped the American government to understand what they were about. American government didn't do that until Yu Chun came. I have a soft spot in my heart for Matt Pottinger because he was a student of my program in Beijing in the year 2004. I got to know him then well before he was famous. Then he went to be a reporter for Reuters and then the Wall Street Journal in Beijing, and suddenly wrote me a letter and said, Liu Laoshi, I'm going to quit. I'm going to go join the Marines, which he did, and he succeeded there. And he succeeded in some investments working on Wall Street, and then got noticed and invited to the White House. Anyway, let me go to point number 6, my last one, about garden variety values. Liu Xiaobo was very strong on this, and I'm pretty sure he would say the same kinds of things today. We look at the populace in China, the ones that are so controlled and so brainwashed and so on because they don't get objective material even about their own country's history. So that's a sort of a desert kind of feeling. But Liu Xiaobo didn't think so. His last book, before he went off to prison, was called "The Future of Free China Lies Within the People." 未来的自由中国在民间 among the people. And this came from his experience from 1999 when he came out of a labor camp until 2008 when he went back to a detention center and then prison. For those 9 years, he was a major figure in what he and others called the citizens movement in China. And that was a reaction against, it was still pursuing the ideals of a more democratic, more civil kind of society, but a reaction against what had happened in the 1980s when there was ferment and there were petitions. And it ended in a massacre, and then it was closed down. Because in the 1980s, right from the beginning, 1979, Democracy Wall, the first famous dissident Wei Jingsheng wrote a wall poster that said, "We need a fifth democracy." I'm sorry, a fifth modernization, because Deng Xiaoping, the top leader, had said, "We need 4 modernizations, agriculture and technology and education, whatever, but not democracy." And Wei Jingsheng said, "Oh, that's fine, but we need democracy too." And then he was arrested and sent to prison for 14 years and stuff. But what I want to point out is that his fifth democracy, the very label, absorbs Deng Xiaoping's thinking, right? Here's the official 4 modernizations. I'm sorry, 4 modernizations. And so Wei Jingsheng is saying, here's a fifth, as if appealing to the top to make these changes from the top down. And then all through the 80s, idealistic intellectuals would look to the top leaders for people who they could pin their hopes on. Hu Yaobang was one, Zhao Ziyang was one, Tian Jiyun. Can these guys tilt it at the top and order more democracy from the top down? With the massacre, that suddenly was exploded as an option. It didn't work, and those ones up at the top that you might look to cooperate in doing top-down reform themselves were dead or in house arrest or so frightened by the atmosphere that they couldn't talk very much anymore. So by the time the late 90s came along and this revival of interest in doing something to make China more democratic, by the time that came, Liu Xiaobo and others thought, we mustn't pin hopes on the top and ask for top-down reform. Go to the bottom and go from the bottom up. And I'll give you, this is my analysis, not his. It's his thinking, though, of 4 steps of going from the bottom up. First of all, you shed your intellectual's pretenses and you go to people who are complaining and ask why. You learn what's the problem. Farmers and workers on strike. They're all through these years. There were lots of what the police called mass incidents, which means ordinary people doing sit-ins or blocking roads or doing that kind of thing. So you go among the people and you listen to what their actual problems are. Step 2 is you publicize the case. Now, a big change came in the late 1990s in China when the internet started coming in, and then it grew very fast during these years. So it became possible to ask people, what are your complaints? Put on the internet, and then people other places can see, oh, we have the same complaints, and can even, as it were, meet online or organize online how to meet in person. So that was step 2, to publicize the case and get others to join. Step 3 would be to, in this ferment, watch for shared principles to emerge. So that it's not just individual complaints, but principles. His wonderful essay, for example, on freedom of speech, which we think is in the United States Constitution, First Amendment, right? And Human Rights Watch broadcasts these kind of values all around the world and says they should be universal values, freedom of speech. But what Liu Xiaobo points out in this article is that, no, it grows from the bottom up. The impulse that I should be able to say what I think is natural enough and human enough that you don't need Human Rights Watch to tell you about it. You don't need Perry Link or somebody telling you about the US Constitution. It's natural. And he starts his essay with 6 case studies about farmers in medium-sized villages, these were, who had been bullied or something and talked back and then were punished for being bullied, and others sympathized with them. And they're all separate, 6 separate ones. But the point of each one is that that impulse to be able to say what you think is right there. You don't have to teach it from above. Step 4, advocate rule changes. And step 3 was watch for principles to appear. And then based on the commonality of the principles, push for rule changes, even perhaps law changes. I'll give you one example of this that meant a lot to Liu Xiaobo, and it clearly shows the case. There was a young man named Sun Zhigang in 2003 who lived in the city of Hankou, right in the middle of China, but he was a graphic designer. And he got a job offer to go down to Guangdong to join this magazine as a graphic designer. And so he goes down there and he just gets there. He rents a bicycle and starts riding around. And the police stop him and say, "Where's your bicycle registry and stuff?" "Oh, I just rented this from a friend. I don't have it. Don't have it." "Well, where's your ID card, your residence permit?" Everybody in Chinese cities has to have one of these to show that they have the right to live in the city. He just got there. He didn't have it yet. He said, "Oh, I'm applied for it. I'll have it in a few days." "No, not good enough." They take him off to the police station. 3 days later, he's dead. And this hits the newspapers. There's a young reporter on one of the Guangzhou newspapers. What's it called? The weekend newspaper, who investigates and found out that he died in police custody and publicized it on the internet. And the story spread all over China, and people naturally sympathized with him. They didn't have to be told whose side to take in that. So there was a lot of empathy around the country. And I use this to illustrate the principle of advocate rule changes, because there were a couple of young lawyers in Beijing who wrote about this case. And then there were some senior officials, legal officials, who took what the young lawyers had read and said, "Yes, we need to do something about this," and put it to the National People's Congress. And step by step by step, the law changed. The law that said you can be sent back to the countryside if you don't have a legal residence permit, because that's what the police had caught him on. 收容遣送 in Chinese, to gather you up and send you back to where you come from. That law was dismantled. Now, there were other laws that replaced it, so it didn't mean that the actual situation completely changed, but the possibility for abuse that had happened to this young guy, Sun Zhigang, seems to have been avoided by having a nationwide new law about that. Now, Liu Xiaobo goes through a whole bunch of other cases that are similar, and not all of them are successful. But the spirit of starting at the bottom, getting people together, finding rules, and pushing for rule changes, that formula became what he lived by for those years. Until 2008, we come to this document that his friends drafted called Charter 08. The name borrowed from Václav Havel's famous Charter 77 in Czechoslovakia. But Charter 08 was a different kind of document. It was about a 32-part blueprint for what we think a civilized democratic society would look like. And Liu Xiaobo at first wouldn't participate in it because he said, "No, we learned our lesson. Top down doesn't work. I'm going to stick with bottom up." But his friends wrote it anyway. And finally, this woman, Deng Zilin, whom I said had such an influence on him, called him in and said, "Xiaobo, you need to help with this, because there's two things you can do better than anybody else. One is edit. You can go through these various parts written by different people and edit them into one document. And then, because you have gone down into society in so many places doing this kind of thing, you can get signatures from all kinds of people that these pointy-headed, wonky intellectuals aren't going to be able to do." So he did. He did those two things, and he got more and more involved with the Charter 08. And then when it was about to be released, it was supposed to be released on December 10th, 2010, which was UN International Human Rights Day. But word of it got out, and there were police gathering around his place and about the place of Zhang Zuhua his friend who was mainly organizing the Charter 08, and they could sense that something was going to happen. So they decided, we're going to give it soon. We'll publicize it right now. Because if they publicize it now and the party cracks down, they're cracking down on something that's already happened. If the party says, don't put that out, and then they do anyway, then they have another crime, which is that they didn't listen to the order. So they put it out 2 days early, and he was taken from his home about 11 p.m. Uh, on the 8th of December, 2008, and never came back home again. I want to give you one more anecdote for why this. I think he would be still in favor of this ground up approach rather than top down approach. And that's from the winter of 2022, when the Winter Olympics were in Beijing. And the Communist Party of China was trying to make a big hoopla of this in order to gather international respect. And here we are, we did the Summer Olympics, and now we're doing the Winter Olympics, and we have this glorious new society. So they had a lot on television and on the internet, encouraging people to click on the Winter Olympics. But as it happened, at that same time, there was a discovery in, was it Jiangsu province, in a remote area, of a woman who had been kidnapped from an interior province in China and literally held in chains by these guys, and had her in a kind of cave and had impregnated her 8 times. I mean, the rule about only one child here, 8 children, and she's discovered here, literally in chains, abused by this man terribly. And this got on the internet, and it spread all over China. And there were more clicks on that story than there were on the Winter Olympics. 1.92 billion clicks on this Tianlin, Iron Chain Woman story. Now, I'm sure Liu Xiaobo would point to that and would ask, why did so many people click on that story? And I'll end with one other essay that he wrote. This was in 2008, shortly before he was taken away. He looked at a case in the province of Guizhou, in a town called Weng'an, and that's not important, but there was a young woman there, 15 years old girl, named Li Shufen, who was raped and killed and thrown into the river. And the police looked at it and said, oh, suicide. That's too bad. But it wasn't suicide. She had been mistreated by 2 young men who were well connected with local officials, and therefore could get off and have it called a suicide. But again, the truth leaked out and got on the internet. And within a few days, 30,000 people came to this small town, surrounded the government offices, held siege, really, and actually burned some cars and overturned them. And finally, the officials were obliged to call the People's Armed Police, in a branch of the military, to put down the protests. So Liu Xiaobo tells this story, but then asks the key question. Why was the reaction so big? Why did 30,000 people come to protest? Was it because they knew this young woman? No. They knew her relatives? No. They were from the same town and they sympathized? No, they were from different towns. Why would they come? And in his analysis, it's because they see the case and empathize, naturally, but beyond empathy, recognize the kind of bullying from experience in their own tradition. The police at the time, one of their categories when they arrested people that were protesting was people who knew the woman, people who were related to her, and then the big category was people who weren't related. So that's the kind of thinking that made him believe that the garden variety decency, you might call it, of ordinary Chinese people survives and is still there. And that's why his book was called what did I call it? The future of free China lies within the people. So I'll stop here. Welcome your questions. I apologize for my raspy voice. I can't help that.
We have a few minutes left. Some folks may need to leave in about 5 if you have to go to class. But I also want to welcome anybody to share any questions here on Zoom and also any questions here. Jared, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so Liu Xiaobo, man, I'm going to butcher this name and I'm so bad. So Liu, when he died in prison.
Yeah.
Was he prepared? Did he know he was probably going to end up a martyr? And because he could have ran. I mean,
could have what?
Huh?
Could have what?
Ran. So gone to the embassy.
No, he couldn't have. He was under tight police surveillance. He couldn't. No, he didn't know about this cancer until about 2 months before it killed him.
So I don't think he knew he was going to end up in prison probably. So did he know he was probably going to end up getting arrested and
Oh, in that larger sense, could he have run to the U.S. Embassy and taken refuge? Yeah, he could have. He was in principle against that. His whole life, he was saying that he would not leave China, even if it cost him prison and cost him whatever. At the very end, when he knew he had cancer and wasn't going to live long, he made an exception to that rule because his wife and her brother both wanted to leave. The brother was under a charge of 11 years in prison for some kind of corruption. I don't know how much truth might or might not be in that charge, but anyway, his wife and her brother both wanted to leave. And right at the end, Germany made it clear that we'll bring you here and you can come here. You can bring your wife and brother with you. And he agreed to that. He didn't make it in the end, but he was prepared to compromise because of his wife. Here's another example. He wanted to make sure the second time around he was a good husband. So he sacrificed everything for that case. When I was in Germany, I lived just by chance right next to a hospital in Heidelberg where a German doctor who went to see him worked, a cancer expert. I interviewed this guy. And he was happy to be interviewed because he thought it was interesting. When the cancer was discovered, Angela Merkel saw Xi Jinping at some conference. In Germany it was. He'd come to Germany. And she said, can't we do anything for Liu Xiaobo? He apparently is very ill in prison. And Xi Jinping said, no, he's too ill to travel. And she said, well, how about we send doctors to him? And Xi Jinping said, okay. So one German doctor and one American doctor from somewhere in Texas, both cancer experts, flew to Beijing to see him and learned that it was hopeless probably to save him, although did ask for permission and it wasn't granted, and then he died pretty soon. Anyway, what I learned from that professor, among other things that was interesting, was this German doctor knew English well, spoke English with me. I don't know German. But he didn't know Chinese, so I said, how did you talk to Liu Xiaobo? And he said, oh, Liu Xiaobo knows English. What? Liu Xiaobo didn't know English. His whole life he read in translation. He wrote a book on the history of Western philosophy, believe it or not, from Aristotle all the way to the Frankfurt School. When he went to college, he majored in the Chinese department, but by his own estimate, took more courses in the philosophy department than in the Chinese department. He just loved it. So, but all of that reading was in translation. He didn't read English. In the labor camp, he tried to learn some. And later in the prison where he died, obviously he had learned some, because when this German doctor saw him, he just said it didn't occur to him that he didn't know English. Liu Xiaobo knows English. Why do you think he doesn't? Well, he didn't when he went to prison. So had a quick mind. Yeah. Yeah, split consciousness. Yeah. Right. Right. Everybody hear the question? How new is this split consciousness thing? It's a great question because it's got a complicated answer. I would argue that human societies in general tend to have that kind of split. Our society, there's certain things that we say or don't say, not necessarily because of government pressure, but even social pressure, political correctness and politeness. So that two levels is not an invention and not new to the communist system. But I would argue, and I'm sure Liu Xiaobo would, that it became much more intense. And you put a landlord up on stage and you berate him. He might be your distant relative. You don't want to berate him, but you have to, because if you don't, then you might be put in the bad guy category. So it became required to you have to perform often enough to people who work units with the political studies of fighting up to show your opinion. And it wasn't an option to be quiet. Never mind freedom of speech, there was no freedom of not speaking. If you didn't speak, you were suspect. So it became a necessary art to be able to do the split consciousness talking at two levels. In earlier Chinese dynasties, there was what we called guanhua, official talk. It was another name for Mandarin, but the officials manipulated an ordinary. So you're right, the distinction is deeply, but the extent, the sharpness of the difference, and the consequences that you get is much bigger than
festivities as we're going here, and then a couple more questions if you want. And I understand also that some of you may need to leave. But
these are the labels.
yeah, can you choose two from there?
Oh,
Don't
two
worry,
from
we'll
there.
choose more later. And I know some of our friends have to leave in the back, so if
All righty.
number
Number 28.
28,
28, 28, 28.
go ahead and see. It might have been one of them.
Another one.
Yeah.
26.
Bring
26.
the book over here, and maybe you can impose on the author to sign it after we wrap up.
I need to borrow a pen.
Yeah. And then, one more. And And then I'll draw some more for the paperbacks.
Okay, good, good, thank you. 56. 56,
Another one.
another one. What a professor giving away free books. 79. All right.
And at the very end, if you stick around, I'm gonna draw 8 more at the end. So there's a pretty good chance if you're here, you'll get a free book. But I'll do those for the paperbacks at the end.
Okay.
Again, they're gonna come in May. I'll ask Perry to write his name on some stickers. Sign the stickers, and I'll add the stickers on the inside. But I think just that mic is still working.
Okay.
Just for a minute. There was a question.
Okay, question? Yeah. I don't know. I wish I had a crystal ball. We who study history find it hard to try to predict the future. The past is already so complicated that. But I don't want to avoid a good faith answer to your question. I think the chances are reasonably good within 10 years that there will be an attempt to blockade, if not invade Taiwan. What will cause it or not has to do with Beijing politics more than international events. Because what matters to Xi Jinping about Taiwan is not the stormy cliffs on the elegant East Coast with the swallows and the beautiful bridges. It's his position in Chinese politics in Beijing. That is, he might be vulnerable to rivals who want to upset him or nudge him aside, and to strengthen his own prestige, both in that group and in the larger Chinese populace, to be able to be tough on Taiwan or win the prize and get Taiwan back would be a tremendous boost to his prestige. If he fails to try, that hurts his prestige. If he tries and fails, that hurts it too. It's that kind of calculation, though. It's Beijing politics will decide it. Of course, the degree to which the outside world, including the US, does so-called deterrence would matter a lot too. That has to be calculated into, do I dare, and if so, when?
Just on that last point too, that how it's so different than that kind of regime with the totalitarian thought control,
Yeah.
where you have to count out ideology.
Right.
And then he was ultimately put in prison for signing a charter, right? A different one, Charter 38 is that?
Charter 08.
Okay.
Yeah.
Based upon Charter 77, which Paul and his buddies were put in prison for.
Yeah.
So speaking out in the face of that is a whole different kind of consequence in terms of splitting in consciousness. See what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
We often split consciousness.
Yeah.
When you have to like assert yourself against, I mean, I wrote some things about Trump on my blog.
Yeah.
And I was like, this could be a bad move, right? Because if politics keep sliding the way they are,
Yeah.
This country could turn fascist. And you just don't know. I know enough about European history to know that, right?
Yeah.
So that's just something that I think that the courage it takes to sign something like that in those circumstances, when you know that, it's a whole different kind of assertion, you know. I just want to make that point. What do you think he would have said about the protests under the COVID lockdowns? I'm just kind of curious. That's the last kind of mass populist kind of reaction against the authority of the state. And more, what did you think about it?
Well, now let me guess what he would think. He of course would sympathize with the protesters, and I think probably read more into it than just a protest against controlling COVID. That is, you're abridging the freedom of assembly in a deeper sense, the freedom of speech in a deeper sense. He'd be looking for bigger principles than just the illness issue itself. But there's no question he would have supported the protesters, including these courageous young women who came out with the blank pieces of paper. Remember that in November of 22, that was? Would have loved it. Blank paper says a lot. Here I am saying nothing, which means saying nothing that's refutable, which means saying everything in a sense, and saying nothing that you can pull me off the jail and hold me responsible for saying. So it's got a defensive as well as an offensive side to it. Like white paper, blank paper does. You mentioned Havel. Havel was a hero for Liu Xiaobo. And this ground up approach, he actually, I can't promise you this, but I think he was inspired originally by Havel in that. Because Havel had that same thing, the description of the authoritarian state that controls everything. And Havel said, you look for the crevices. And in those crevices, you be civilized. Start your own, not regime-controlled, civilized small society. And you push it as far as you can. And Liu Xiaobo said, if the regime cracks down on your small civil society, you don't fight back because you'll be defeated. They have all the guns. You just retreat, wait for them to get preoccupied with something else, and then come back and reoccupy the space that you had before. And it will be bigger the second time around. This kind of strategy, I think he borrowed from Havel. Yeah.
What they did, they called the new evolutionists, trying to evolve their civil society from below. And everybody thought they were crazy, and it wasn't going to work. And
until it did.
Fortuitous circumstances. It's a remark. He's a hero of mine.
Havel.
Yeah.
Me too. More questions?
I think you mentioned a couple of times that you characterized Charter 08 as a top-down initiative, but could one argue the opposite? I mean, that certainly there were Beijing intellectuals who were not at the bottom of society, but
Yeah.
they weren't power holders, right? They were
Right.
at the margins of.
Right.
So in what sense was it top-down rather than bottom-up?
Yeah, the authors were all sort of dissidents, not power holders, but still an intellectual elite. And what I meant more about top-down was not who originated the effort, but the design of how the effort would work. The Charter 08 was sort of a blueprint. Someday when we have a new democratic society, here's the way we should have education. Here's the way we should have the military. Here's the way environmental policy should be. In that sense, it's a plan that's going to be applied to the rest of society. It's more what I mean intellectually top down, not necessarily people. Although the signers of Charter 08 were not bottom of the society either. They were pretty well-known people in their spheres. Be it as it may, he didn't want to support Charter 08 until fall, when Deng Xiaoping encouraged him to do it.
That's not very different than Charter 77 too, because Charter 77 said we're not an organization.
Yeah.
We're apolitical.
Yeah.
All we're doing is what the Helsinki Accord said, which
Right.
Stein said we.
Right.
Which is that we create civil society. Well, and the reason it started was because that rock band.
Yeah. The
Plastic
plastic people of the universe. Yeah.
wanted to play their music, so they put the charter. And I went to prison.
Liu Xiaobo has an essay where he talks about the plastic people of the universe to illustrate how if you do this from the crevices, bottom up, slowly pushing, it might not look like you're getting anywhere until some incident like plastic people makes it happen. Almost like catalyst. But the ground's prepared on it.
And Havel then, he developed an international reputation. So then when he was put in prison the second time, there was concern. Hey, what's happening? Unlike that. have to admire.
Of course. More questions. Where's Professor Murray? 4 o'clock.
I think that, well, we kept it for longer than planned. Thanks to the students I know, and your 4 o'clock professor now. Professor Ling for keeping you all here, but I really appreciate the time, Terry. Thanks, Alan and Tim, and everybody for coming out. Thanks for that class. Thanks, Professor Ling. So we'll go ahead and wrap up the broadcast here. I'll be in touch with Angelo.